Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Philos-o-clock with EcceFatum. Today we're talking about identity. Who are you? Who am I? I don't know. We're going to try to figure that out. What is up, EcceFatum?
Doing okay for the circumstances.
Yeah, you
How are
got
you
your
doing?
second shot today, right, of your vaccine?
I got the second shot on Wednesday, so
Mm,
I've been knocked out yesterday, and I'm feeling a lot better today.
that's good.
And then I had a accident and needing a couple of stitches a week ago.
But
So
no
it
long-term
hasn't.
damage, you just got a little bit scuffed up.
Yeah,
I think you said no concussion. That's good.
yeah.
I had one head bonk injury where my parents were worried I might have a concussion. I was just sitting on my bedroom floor, being a child, doing fun things like playing with action figures, and the light covering on the light of the fan above me just fell off onto my head. So probably
Oh,
probably dropped like 8 feet or so. But I think it turned out okay. That was a while back. The head is a very
well,
important location to defend. We have our skull, which encases the brain, which is pretty vital for thinking and consciousness and being who we are. But on top of that, you could wear a helmet if you were going to do anything dangerous, like drive a motorcycle. But you wanted to talk about identity today, and I guess one of the things we should reference here is Triforce Traders talk about the void and voidness and his perspective on how he sees himself in the grand scheme of things. And that's one of the questions that every person has for them, which makes it really fun. It applies to everyone, even if you're not reading philosophy every day. It's still something that you have to sort out yourself. And his response to it is more Eastern. We've talked about Confucius, Lao Tzu, Buddha in our previous Philos-o-clock episodes. And he's more in that area where he's not serving some purpose of a higher deity. He's not fitting some scheme together where he's providing a crucial piece. He is part of a game that he gets to participate in how he likes to for the duration of his mortal life, and he's okay with that. I think a lot of people usually try to either copy a meaning from somewhere else where it says, this is your meaning, now go do this, or you make one up, which is more of my category. I feel like I have meaning and purpose in my life, but that's just manufactured by my own ability to reason. What about you? Are you more of the
um,
voidness, or you have some purpose that you would articulate?
so there's been this reaction in Western philosophy to the concept of voidness, which is Nietzsche's nihilism, which comes from the same basis that there is no inherent meaning to anything going on, but the conclusion is a bit different. So while voidness would teach you to be okay with the fact that there is no meaning, nihilism shoves you towards actively choosing your own meaning and being good with what you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go more towards that category because it's I want to cling on to something, and I feel better choosing my own meaning than being okay with inherent nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't to say that the other approach is wrong or anything. It's just that you need to choose the model that fits yourself. If you're okay with not having meaning, that's fine as well. But if you want meaning in life and you're not okay with a given meaning through religion or through social aspects, you should choose it yourself. Otherwise, someone else or something else is going to choose it for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ultimately you still have to make decisions for yourself in life. So whether you ascribe to one belief system or another, your day to day, you still have agency, which means that even if you don't perceive yourself as having a clear purpose, you do have patterns of behavior that you as a individual need to manage.
Yeah.
So we're tackling identity today, and that's a very broad topic. I was trying to thinking, how would I break down identity and how is it difficult for humans? And the breakdown that came to mind for me was kind of how a teenager develops and how they're basically on a seesaw between wanting to fit in and wanting to stand out and be unique. And humans, I think, want both of these things. You want to be accepted by the group because we're social creatures and social standing is incredibly valuable. It gives us a lot of support and access to just everything that we would like to do. But at the same time, we don't want to go unnoticed a lot of the time and just kind of fly under the radar and no one acknowledges us. And we don't want to kind of get lost in the masses. So we want to be distinguished, but at the same time, we want to fit in. And it seems like those two aspects are sometimes at odds with each other, because if you're making yourself stand out, you're not blending in with the pack. But if you're standing out too much, people will feel isolated. So identity, how you describe yourself, how you feel like you either fit in or don't, what you would describe as your defining characteristics as a person, that's pretty hard to figure out. So good luck to us tackling this topic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I find it interesting that you pick the teenage years because, in my opinion, the teenage years make a big part in our development in terms of who we become, and that we tend to fall back into that uncertainty of the teenage years in terms of how we want to express ourselves, who we want to be, ever so often when we're unclear about the path forward in later life. So that they have a big influence on who we become, arguably a bit too much so for some people at least. Like we're falling back into the schoolyard habits whenever we're uncertain about how we should react to things.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying that's why adults still bully each other like they're in grade school? Just falling back to their old habits, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're easy, they're learned, and as you said, we're trying to be ourselves, and we don't know yet what that actually means, but we're also trying to be ourselves within that social context of the people surrounding us, which is people around the same age with the same insecurities. So you're kind of making up this mess of social construct with everyone's uncertain about anything, and you're just developing a persona based on this uncertainty, and it's rather random what comes out of it, in my opinion. When we talk about identity, I think that the first question that would arise is, what is identity in terms of, is it our inherent self or is it our externalized self? So is it just who we are on our inside, or is it who we are as a representation to others? How do you see that?
It ends up being both, because a huge part of who you perceive yourself to be would be how others treat you. So that's a really major factor. And this is something that I think a lot of people mess up pretty often when it comes to communicating with each other, where they'll say something like, I didn't mean it that way, but the effect that you have on the other person still matters immensely. So they're completely connected to each other, I think. So you can talk about them in isolated capacity, but in practice, the way that you talk to others and the way that you perceive yourself are united. They're kind of connected. I think it's interesting too how your perception of yourself can be more or less accurate from what you might say is scientifically true. So if you're measuring the stats of a person, there are things like body dysmorphia or whatever, where you see yourself inaccurately. Your self-perception is not true to your actual self. So that's one thing that could cloud your overall assessment of who you are. So listeners, be mindful of that. A lot of people will have a really negative self-talk and internal voice that is oftentimes echoing the voice of other people, maybe in your teenage years, maybe when you were a child and your parents talked to you that way. But the voices in your head, I feel like, aren't necessarily who you are. Triforce and I mentioned this in the Void conversation of how we tend to talk about ourselves as we are one agent, one individual, but we're not always unified. So I feel like even that of saying, I am Neuro, it's not a perfect concept because I have competing impulses within myself at certain points. I'm not always on the same page. You have different thoughts in your head. Maybe you have a kind of practical mind within yourself who says, all right, these are the things that I ought to get done. And then you have the leisure and fun side who says, let's get ice cream. And those are both within yourself. Those are both you, but you're not a completely and perfectly unified agent, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It's there's this nice quote from Nietzsche that I think is, he talks about it in terms of morality, but I think it's the different traits we have as humans or as an individual. Like there's different aspects that shine through depending on the situation, depending on our mood. So we're not this fixed one individual, but we're a variety of different traits, different aspects, depending on how we choose to act or whether or not we actively choose one side. So this is from Beyond Good and Evil, which is a collection of weird short statements about anything that is beyond good and evil. It's a interesting read, really weird at times. So Nietzsche said, as in the stellar firmament, there are sometimes two suns which determine the path of one planet, and in certain cases suns of different colors shine around a single planet, now with red light, now with green, and then simultaneously illuminate and flood it with motley colors. So we, modern men, owing to the complicated mechanisms of our firmament, are determined by different moralities. Our actions shine alternately in different colors, and are seldom univocal. And there are often cases also in which our actions are multicolored. So he talks about it in the context of morality, but I think it's just the underlying our what's the word for this? Like what makes us going? What makes us choose one side or another?
Our motivation.
Which motivation, yeah. To some degree, you could call it morality. It's just there's not a single defining aspect to it. It's ever so often there's a fight ongoing within you between different ideals, different things you want to follow, and different ideals you set for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So the question becomes, within this model between internalized and externalized identity, are you the struggle within you which determines what you're going to do, or are you purely the output? Are you defined by what you do based on that internal struggle?
By society, you are defined by your actions, so the end result, more so than your internal thoughts. But for the person, their subjective reality is their valid experience of the thoughts in their head. And you don't always go with every impulse you have. One of the most important features we have with our brain would be inhibitory signals, which are things that stop an action. sometimes stopping an action is just as valuable as performing an action. When that could be a cliff or something, you say, you know what, let's not try this. That's something that really helps our survival. And being able to have an impulse within your own mind, process that, and then decide against that, that can be really prudent for your own decision making and making sure you don't make mistakes.
That's a really good point. So we see others in terms of purely their actions, but we see ourselves in terms of this internal struggle we have that would determine our actions. So we already see there's somewhat of a disconnect between what we perceive to be our own identity and the identity of others, because within others we might expect there is some kind of internal struggle, but we don't see it. So we don't see what their output is. But the sense that we have it ourselves, we don't, we often don't know how we should act, what is the best thing to do, or if you want, what is the worst thing you could do, which defines the internet.
What's the worst that could happen? Oh, it could be really bad.
We have this sense of ourselves that is completely different to the sense of others, which makes it really interesting to define identity. And in terms of when we look at others, we want to take the shortcut in terms of identity. We want to put make it easy on ourselves, so we identify people on significant traits. Things like gender or racial identity come to mind, where we see someone and we can already put them, we already know something about them based on the external traits they have, but we really don't know anything about them because we don't have an insight to the internal traits. Similarly to that, identity is also constructed not by the labels that others put onto ourselves, but the labels we ourselves put onto us. So if I identify as a Democrat in the US, is not the same as if you happen to vote Democrat, but it's a label you actively choose and then you act upon it. In some situations, in others you probably don't. So identity in today's context, and I think this has always been this way, is to some degree a collection of labels we put onto ourselves in order to make our identity understandable to others. We're more complex than just a couple of terms that define us, but if someone asks you who you are, you could define yourself to some degree within a couple of terms, which makes identity really simple and complex at the same time.
Yeah, I would say it's more so getting a zip code of someone's identity based on the labels that they share. They can give you an approximation of where their personality and their tastes and things might fall, but it's not going to tell you their life story in just a couple labels.
Exactly. But we want to know, like, we don't want to listen, for the most part, to someone's life story, but we want to have a way to identify them based on a couple of traits. We want to know who we talk to in order to see whether or not we're interested in their life story and how they got there. And therefore, it's useful to have these labels, these traits, and to be able to quantify them and to have them in a basically as a set of identifiers, and to have just an easy way to know someone or to know the zip code of someone. But it gets problematic when we try to oversimplify it and think of these traits as the defining traits, or as we know a person based on knowing their zip code, which is never the case.
It is a necessary aspect of just navigating the world to take some mental shortcuts. If you perceived the depth of a human consciousness every time you looked at a person and you thought about all their life story and experiences and scars and triumphs and defeats and all this kind of stuff, it'd be really overwhelming to do. So usually people will just put new people they meet in some categories that they already understand. And then they move that person in their own mental headspace based on how that person behaves and what else they learn about them. So I feel like sometimes that can lead to things like prejudice, where it's a negative set of assumptions. But a lot of the times it's a way to just categorize a little bit and get a rough approximation. Like for me to say that I'm a metalhead, I don't necessarily listen to every metal band that exists, but that gives someone a data point that they can work from and then navigate from there. Shortcuts are okay, but be aware that you use shortcuts. Another thing that's really common too when it comes to identity is people tend to assume that their group is the best. It's kind of like a team pride thing in a sense, but it's also a depth of experience thing. You have the greatest depth of experience in your own tribe, in your own sports clubs, and whatever you're doing. And you also understand the nuance and the really hardworking, talented people who are in that group. You don't know all the hard work and the nuance and stuff that goes into groups that you've never been a part of. So oftentimes we'll assume that ours is the best. We're the most unique. We're the most intelligent. You see people do this in politics all the time. The other side of the political spectrum is criminally dumb. That's just the modus operandi a lot of the time. Because if they were as smart as us, they would be on the same side of the aisle as us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's famously just one sacred timeline, so there's just one universal truth, and it's either accepting that truth or denying it. So there's can only be one side of the argument can be right. That's just fact. Yeah, reality is a bit more complicated than that, I fear.
From my perspective, I would say that there is an objective reality that we seem to share, at least on Earth, where there's some overlap. Again, we could be in the Matrix or something silly like that, but overall it seems like we share the same days, weeks, and years, and we're on the same space together. So what we do impacts other people. There's like I don't know the name of the school of the thought, but it's like everyone's subjective reality is somewhat equally valid. So there are multiple truths rather than one shared experience. I wouldn't say truth with a capital T. But I think you can, in many cases, be more or less correct. That there is some shared sequence of events that's happening around us, and we're all kind of looking for the same truth, and we're trying to find the same bearings together.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that you're correct in there being one objective reality, and our interpretation of that reality is wildly different from person to person. And there is more or less correct interpretations. I would definitely agree with that. But I don't think any side of any argument can be certain about them having achieved the capital T truth, or even the lowercase truth. I guess there's never really a way to have absolute certainty about our interpretation being right. But it's really easy to find certainty that the other side is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're all wrong about a lot of things, so it's not really too hard to be picky. That's another aspect, too, that I think we can tie into identity as well, which is seeing other people's identity and being okay with that. I think a lot of times people just have the lens of the critic on all the time, and they'll look at a person. As a streamer, I get to experience this on a very regular basis. Someone looks at me and they see what I'm doing and they see the areas that I'm failing in, and then they ask kind of a why are you not better than you are question. Like maybe you're GM, why are you not top 16 GM? Maybe you're going about your workday as a this or that, and then they're looking at the flaws right away. One thing that I've used as a tool for appreciating the beauty of human experience is thinking about how many moving parts are all working together for one human to exist. Like how many different cells, organelles, organ systems moving in tandem to create a life, like a human life that has beliefs and desires, and how awesome that is. So even a less than stellar person, even someone who's below average in maybe some categories that you would consider to be important, that's still a magnificent creature that's walking around and accomplishing amazing things if you're looking at the scale of what can exist in the universe. Like a human being is pretty awesome. So having that attitude helps me a lot to see people as great and awesome. Just every single human person, you're great because of how awesome it is to be a person. Another thing too that's been like an aspect of our civilization's progress has been seeing humans as the same, like that we're the same species and we don't need to quarrel amongst each other, that we can have equal systems of justice and judgment, that we all should have equal rights and all this kind of thing. That's been very much a work in progress. But in a state of nature, it's pretty hard to tell whose side anyone is on. Like there are bears and panthers, and there were different primate species all running around. So one of the big ticket items for our own interpretation of reality has been also tackling the question, what does it mean to be human? Because that's something that links us all together with our identity.
Yeah, that's the question of the in-group and out-group, as you were referring to, and the sphere of our moral consideration, where we used to be a lot more tribal than we are today. We're still tribal in many senses of the word, but we have this sense of shared humanity. We, for the most part, agree that all people are equal in the sense that we're all human and we all have the same rights, the same, we all deserve the same moral consideration. And whenever we diverge from that, we get into really, really terrible territory. When we see others as less than ourselves based on any form of identity, we get into a moral superiority and we don't have to treat them the same. And this is one of the things that I'm really violently against, that we're trying to make others different, not in a way of them being different, but in a way of them being, we need to consider what they want and their goals to be less than ourselves.
Yeah, this ties back into the aspect I was talking about of wanting to stand out. Because say, for example, you're the kind of person who blends in a lot and maybe you don't really know what's excellent about you. A lot of times you'll get ideas from other people that are very kind of group and tribal oriented that say that our tribe is the best tribe and we're better than these other tribes and these other tribes are bad for these reasons. And they can use that as ammunition just within their own life experience to perceive themselves as better or great or whatever. And it's a pretty difficult task, I think, to feel positive and satisfied with yourself, given how many things a human being could technically accomplish and how many successful people are out there getting a bunch of bread and doing amazing things. I think a lot of people will fall into the category of, well, am I actually proud of myself to actually think I'm a good person who's making good progress?
Yeah, I think that there, what Triforce was talking about is really important. Like, what game are you willing to play? What game are you willing to participate in? And I think that this, um, I need to become rich or to become famous, to have success in this um, very narrow sense. It is not helpful for most people because, first off, it's not something that is widely achievable. Like, being super rich or being super famous is a really fringe part of society by definition. Because if everyone is super famous, no one is super famous anymore. So we need to look at what we're trying to do, and I don't think you need to become rich or famous. You don't even need to become good at anything specific in order to live a good and fulfilled life. But the question should be, what do you pick out of these different things, and then what are you able to pursue to a meaningful degree?
What can you get done in life? That's a pretty tricky thing. And from the teenage years, you're being taught a kind of general set of knowledge so that as you reach adulthood, you can steer your life ship in the direction you choose. We've got a lot of choices now, and the choices now are very different from what they used to be, which leads into a lot of issues that I think we have. We used to be hunter-gatherers, so the decisions we had to make would be, when do I hunt? And who do I hunt with? And when I bring stuff back, how do we divide it? And what are the threats out here in the woods? Like, what could kill me? Are there competing tribes? Like, what do I have to look out for? Nowadays, we sit in chairs and we do a bunch of technology stuff. There are still people who hunt and people who gather and that kind of thing, but the day-to-day of information age experience is pretty different from what it used to be and what our psychology has been evolved to process. So if we're seeing issues with like social media causing people to be really dissatisfied with themselves, yeah, we didn't used to look at humanity that way. You could see your tribe and the neighboring tribe. You didn't see what people were doing in Morris here, what's happened in Australia. You wouldn't be able to know that if you were in the Americas. It's way too far away. You can't walk there. Maybe over generations people can walk around, but yeah, it's a very different game than it used to be. So don't be too hard on yourself if you can't really make sense of stuff.
I would agree that having a good sense of one's own identity or the place where they are within society these days got a lot more complicated over time. And with social media and all the different influences we have these days, it makes it more difficult to have this sense of who am I. And as Oh No SE2 said in chat, I think I would agree that it's better to not try to have this fixed sense of who you are, but seeing yourself as something that is changing, that is not this clear version, but this constant struggle of ideals and ideas, which acted out will make you as an individual or as a person.
Takes a lot of mental effort to think about these things as well. That's one of the aspects of surviving, is you need energy, that is food, to be able to process thought, and the brain is a very expensive organ to run, let alone if you're trying to deal with things that are both emotionally heavy, like your identity and your purpose, and also practically vital, which is how you navigate your social group and how you think about yourself and what direction you drive in with your actions and choices.
Yeah, this also brings up the question which we, I think, talked about last time, um, about whether or not questioning meaning or questioning identity is something that evolution had in mind. If this is a concept or a something that we're able to do that is actually useful for us as a species. I think it's great in one sense where we can gather a better understanding of ourselves, of the universe, of everything surrounding us by having a better sense of this. But it can also be destructive in the sense of if you're questioning your own self, your own identity, if you're questioning meaning or the lack thereof, this can be destructive. So it's not something that is good. It's also not something that's evil. It's something that fits neatly within that category of beyond the two.
You, I think, mentioned a question right as we started about who I am, and I think it was related to time. Of am I the same person who I was or something?
Yeah, I think that the question was, who have you become since we last talked?
I've become more flexible, slightly. I'm
Nice.
working on my Achilles, so it's fighting. I'm basically wrestling for dominance with an old injury that I got pretty hurt from it. I couldn't walk for a while, but then I could walk and then I could run. But if you're looking at like the layout of a mech that's running, it's kind of like that area on me, it turns yellow before any other area if I exert myself. So if all my systems are green and I go for a run, my Achilles is the first part to complain. And I was talking with a personal trainer about working on that, so I've been doing stretches, doing a foam roller thing, just trying to get a lot of activity in the area, because as a streamer, I can sit and do my job, and I sit a lot more than hunter-gatherers used to back in the day. So I'm working on that. Ideologically, perspective-wise, pretty much the same. I haven't really made any major turns or anything, but I'm appreciating a nice, cool Seattle summer now that the heat wave is gone, and grateful to be getting to make awesome philosophy content with you. Are you the same
Awesome.
person as last time?
More or less. I've got a couple of stitches on my forehead. Um, this didn't change much, but we went surfing to that artificial wave in Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
and it happened on I think my third or fourth wave, so pretty early into the session, and it was disappointing to not be able to surf anymore and just spend 1.5 days there watching my wife surf.
Mm.
But the change I realized was that I was okay with that. Like, I would have been happier being able to surf myself, but it was still, I had a good time there, and it was this shift. I realized that I don't need this in order to be happy. It would be nice to have it, but I can be happy without getting that thing I want, which is a nice insight. Like, it's more of living the moment and seeing it unfold than trying to force my will onto what should happen.
The captain of your fate, the master of your soul. Yeah, we are constantly changing. Ship of Theseus is a
Yeah.
concept that we've mentioned before of as different pieces are replaced in the same system, is it at the end of the journey the same system? Can you think of it in that way? One of the examples we've talked about was the WoW Guild and how we've cycled in and out players. We have a lot of the same players who have been with the guild for over 2 years. Some people who are brand new. Is the guild creation the same guild? In many ways, yes. In some other ways, definitely no. You can say the same thing about people. where as people change and develop new experiences, their alignment could change. If you want to use a D&D concept, maybe they started out lawful good and they got in with a bad way with some bad people and they end up being chaotic evil. That would be a major turn in someone. Maybe they had that nature within them all along. We can't really know that because the internal thoughts of a person aren't known unless they tell you. Yeah, we're constantly changing. Every single conversation matters. I feel like that's an aspect that people take for granted really often, is that the way that you talk to people, that is part of their life's experience, and it can change them. Either they learn something new, maybe it improves their mood, or you're just berating them in being nasty, and that's how you're choosing to spend your life's experience and affect them.
Yeah, the concept of being ever changing, but having this inherent identity that is somewhat fixed but somewhat flexible to changes is something we'll get into later on. What you said about every conversation not necessarily changing you, but at least having the potential to change you is something really important. There's this distinction in coaching between two types of conversation, one of which is transactional, the other is transformational. So transactional conversation, for example, is in a store you ask for a couple of apples and then you pay for the couple of apples. So the whole thing is just a transaction. You share something like, how was your day? What you think about the weather? Like there's nothing changing within you based on the conversation. And I think a lot of shouting contests where you might have the conversation about a topic you feel deeply about, but the other person feels a different way, so you're just shouting at each other, it's also not transformational. You won't have the other person see something different on their viewpoint by shouting at them that they're wrong. But a transformational conversation could just be, as we do now, talking about a subject and sharing our views on it, and a little bit of what the other person thinks will resonate with you. It might not necessarily be the one thing that they want to tell you, but it will changes over time to have conversations rather than shouting matches. And this is for the matter, for the most part, that we're learning to see the world a different way. We're to somewhat learning how other people see the world and how we might need or want to adjust our own interpretation of it.
Yeah, to use Triforce's example of seeing life as a game, by listening to other people, you understand more how the other pieces on the board move, which is still advantageous to you. So even selfishly, I would say developing really good listening skills helps you navigate your life better. But yeah, in a conversation, if you really want to succeed in the sense that you get on the same page and then you are able to convince the other person of something, if that's your goal, being able to figure out where they are in their perspective and then work from that location to where you're trying to take them or help them see. A lot of times I think what people do as another mental shortcut is they listen to people who they think are smart or authority figures, and they hear what that person said in that circumstance, and they kind of have a quiver of quips, and they just throw the quip that fits in that situation. Okay, I'm in scenario D. All right, I'm going to throw this quip that I saw the person say on TV, and it was really funny.
Yeah, I think it's also a difference in what are you having conversations for. If you want to have conversations in order to be right and to convince other people that you're right, it can be transformational because you're not willing to learn something new. But conversation, as implied by the word itself, it should be a thing where you converse. You get input and you make something out of it, rather than just having your output and shielding off from anything that's different to that.
Mm-hmm. But EcceFatum, confirmation bias feels so good. I love hearing that I'm right.
That's true. I can definitely relate to that. I think you can always find part of where you're right in your own ideas, alongside of getting new input that could confirm it even more. Like you're just by someone else being right does not mean you're inherently wrong about what you're saying. But that's the kind of nuance you really need to get into conversation for. Like, it's not something you'll figure out in a shouting match.
Mm.
Or I've never experienced that. Maybe that's possible, but I've never seen that happen. Yeah, ship of Theseus and what's identity in a philosophical sense. I want to get briefly into this. So, as we said, identity is this collection of inherent traits where something has a certain set of identifiers that were like seeing a chair. A chair has part to sit on, it has 3 to 4 legs. It's a chair. We can identify it as such. And Plato, in his World of Pure Form, he talked about the essence of a chair. The essence of a chair would be something to sit on. So no matter if you call a chair or a Stuhl, as it is in German, it doesn't lose its essence of chairiness. It's always something. Stuhl.
Nope, it lost its essence of chairness because it has essence of shoeness to my English-speaking brain. Now when you say shoe, I just think it's a shoe.
All right, fair enough. It's not, when you talk about it in this sense, it definitely loses essence. But when we're both looking at it, we both would see the same essence. And Plato asked the question. Plato asked the question of what is it? This chair. If you think about a chair, do you think about a specific chair, or do you think about chair in the sense of all its inherent traits which make it a chair and would make it a chair in any language, in any understanding of the word, of anything that shares those essential aspects of being the thing to sit on? Are they the same thing? And is this concept outside of any specific chair? Like, this is the world of pure form, where there is this chair concept that can only exist when we have a chair to be looking at, to have an example of it, but it's also, there's no specific chair that this would actually apply to, but it covers all the chairs.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Philos-o-clock, where we are seeking out the prime chair. If anyone has seen the prime chair, which is the essence of all chairs and chairness, please let us know. Yeah, I'm thinking in my own mind, whenever you say chair and I think about the concept, it's a wooden chair and it's got a cushion on it. It's not my gamer chair that I use for streaming. That's not the first chair that I would think of when I think of the concept of chair and chairness. This is like race car, stylish gaming stuff.
I see a wooden chair too. It doesn't have a cushion on it. It has 4 legs, like going a bit outward, not the straight kind of legs. It's like the most basic chair I can think of.
Mm. What's your chair, chat?
So this already gives us this abstract sense of identity, where identity is the summary of the inherent traits. And now we're getting into, all right, what is identity as it relates to others? So is one chair identical to another chair of the same kind, or it looks the same? So if you have a couple of chairs in the room, are they all the same chair? And this is where it gets really tricky, because you could argue that they're basically the same chair, and if you would place one instead of the other, no one would notice.
It is of that type of chair, but it's not that instance of chair.
Exactly. So Wittgenstein had a really nice response to this, and he said, well, roughly speaking, to say two things that are identical is nonsense, and to say one thing that is identical with itself is to say nothing. So you can have two things that are the same because they're two separate things, and if you say one thing is identical to itself, you're just speaking nonsense, basically.
Mm.
So what can we get from that is identity is something that is innate to not just every living being, but to everything. It has its own identity, its own history. It might have been produced 4 seconds before the other chair, but it was produced in a different instance. It might have took it, it's not identical. It's different. The differences might be really small, and they might be neglectable for our sense of what we get out of the chair, but it's still a separate instance of chair.
So we've reasoned up from prime chair to chair 2. What do you do with two chairs? Are these the same chair or different chair? There's a scene of this in the interview with the very idiotic news reporter character, and he's trying to communicate to the Korean people in North Korea that he is same but different but still same, which is basically in this chair case. They are the same in type of chair, but they are different in instance of chair. But if you could put one in place of the other, you can use them both the same.
They both share this notion of chairiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an interesting way to break it down, especially in terms of moral consideration. We're all human, but we all have different identities, but we share this humanness, which means we share, we should share the same moral consideration as any other human being, or as to some degree as any other central being, which should have moral consideration, except for robots for now.
But a key difference here between a chair and a human being is the aspect of it being a living creature, and we give humans more rights than we give to chairs.
Yeah, that's the sentience. Like, if you're able to experience and feel things, that definitely gives you a different category of moral consideration.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I excluded robots, because they're also, to some degree, for now, able to experience things, but they're not able, as far as we know, to feel things.
Mm-hmm.
So my Roomba going through the house, it's able to experience something standing in its way, but I don't think it feels bad about it if there's something in the way. I'm not sure how the mechanisms work though. So I guess we will have moral consideration for robots as AI develops in the future, but not just now.
Does a Roomba feel disappointment? For now. Now your Roomba doesn't, but wait till they patch it a few times. It will sneak up on us, I think. Because I think it'll start out with, like, already we have, say, the GPS. It talks to us, it tells us when to turn. And we're very comfortable with that. And as the information that we get from an entity that's like a voice in the car gets better and better, it's going to resemble a human person more and more. With the text conversation, I think a lot of times we can already trick the person into thinking it's another human pretty well, if you're actually throwing some of our best AI at it. But as you can tell from trying to navigate phone menus when you're trying to call somebody, it's not the best right now. We still got a ways to go. And if you're a standard company, you're probably not going to have the most complex and amazing AI in whatever you're building. Have you seen the movie Chappie? Robot movie?
Doesn't ring a bell.
It has the artist from The Antwoord in it. But basically, they're using a robot police force in South Africa to fight crime. And one of the units gets a experimental kind of software on it that one person is working on because he wants to be able to make a robot that can make art instead of a police robot. And Chappie is born, and then he gets picked up by basically gang members, I think, and they raise him. And he fixes their PlayStation and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's got good CGI. The graphics of the robot and what he fights and stuff are pretty cool. The character is really likable. Recommend. It does kind of like lead into some of those questions, but it's not really a predominantly philosophical movie. But it presents the concepts in a way that you can kind of imagine for yourself.
Yeah, I'll have to watch that. Looks really interesting. Yeah, I think the tendency of movies raising philosophical questions, it's like almost any movie could raise a certain amount of questions, and then there's some movies that just lay it on really thick where it almost becomes nonsense with all the different concepts they trying to shove in. So I prefer something that's more on the you have to think about yourself to come up with the concepts than some movies that just laying it on this thick. There's like, all right, now think about this existential dilemma, and now this.
Mm. They give you a barrage of existential dilemmas.
Yeah, it can be good too, but for the most part, it's just like it. The film tries to be smarter than it is, which is never a good thing in my opinion. But yeah, I'll have to watch that. It's really interesting. So, where are we at in the conversation? What's the identity of this talk? I think we can gather that it's really difficult to pinpoint identity. It's easy to gather a bunch of labels in order to have a sense of identity, but it's not a nearly complete picture. It's just a as you said, the zip code of something. And if we want to know someone's identity, we really have to dig deep. And this also goes for our own identity. And what I found interesting here is kind of the theories of how we construct identity. And as we talked about this internalized and externalized model, the prevailing idea of how we construct identity is the combination of the two. So basically, we grow up, we start to become able of language, able to see the world and interpret it ourselves. We, for the most part, have our parents telling us about the world. A bit later on, we have our peers, people of the same age, where we can kind of talk about our ideas of the world and how we should identify within that. Like, how are we standing towards this soccer team or the other? Like, how should we anchor ourselves within this broader systems? So the prevailing idea of how we construct identity these days is that we have this inherent essence to ourselves. This would be to some degree genetic, also with aspects of socialization that are beyond what we can still remember. And then we start to consciously experience the world. And we start to internalize things we see and in exchange externalize what our internalization was like. So we see someone else being a fan of this soccer team, and then we, in order to have this social cohesion, we externalize the same idea, so we become fan of the same soccer team. We internalize that as our as the way we expressed ourselves and the kind of feedback that came back from us. So basically, we construct identity by intake and outtake and intake from the outtake again. Does that make sense?
There's a lot of back and forth to it, but yes, we identify based on the information that we've taken in thus far, and then we package that and deliver that to other people in a sort of description.
Yeah. So, and this in the context of the ship of Theseus means that we're, in many aspects of our being, not all of them, we're always subject to change. We're always able to change. A great variety of our personality, our identity, based on what we put out, what the feedback is of that output, and then we internalize that new input, and we become someone different based on who we project outwards, which is a really interesting concept. So to visualize this, I think, a bit better and not go in, out, and just have this circular motion. For you as a streamer, you have this identity of being thoughtful, being respectful, being okay with losing, even though it still rustles your jimmies. And this is something that you've produced over time, and getting feedback on how you project yourself will have strengthened that conviction to do that. So you've become more neuro-esque in your pursuit of being neuro.
Yes. And that's a concept I read about in the concept of D&D characters. You tend to behave more in the direction of characters that you play as in roleplay. So I tried to make Neuro a good character that I wouldn't like have regrets and be like, no, I'm not like that, which makes it pretty dicey to play a villain character. I think you have to be careful with that. I wonder if people, I think with every broadcaster, you could say they have some distance between their streamer persona and their true self, and that's unique to every individual. Basically, are they purely authentic and are they totally unfiltered on stream? That's just who they are. They never swear, break TOS, and they're perfectly consistent. Maybe some people are putting on a show, or they have a sort of brand and character that's pretty different from themselves. I would say Neuro is a concentration of a lot of what I strive for. So it's kind of like All Might when he's in the super strong mode, but I'm not like living up to Neuro ideals perfectly all the time, because I'm mortal and I'm a human, but I set it up to where I want to be moving myself in that direction as a result of it. Rather than if I was pretending to be a toxic and edgy streamer, that would incentivize me to do stuff like that. And it would just create a bunch of homework of like then talking to people after of, no, this is like my bag as a streamer. I'm just rude to people. Don't take it personally, because the damage is already done when you do that. So I think just from like a economical standpoint, I think it's really great to be respectful. From a compassionate standpoint, it's also really great to be respectful. So you've got the two sides of value here. And we're coming off the back of a toxic, bro, edgy gamer culture where it was cool to haze each other and just like talk mad shit about how bad other people are. And that's just how you communicate. That can change, and that it's cool to change and update that. It's not just because they want you to be nice. No, there's utility. I think they described me on one of the recent Pylon shows as most polite. I hadn't really gotten that as a word, so that was a little bit of a surprise in terms of my identity, of that's how I had acted out Neuro so far, that they would say polite. It's not bad. I wouldn't shy away from that, because there are some quotes like, manners maketh man, and you will know a samurai by his manners. That was a really distinguishing factor too, is the level of discipline and focus they took in their bearing as they walked around, even if they weren't in battle. Like that they were that prepared to reflect upon their lord's reputation with every action, and also reflect upon their own honor and death ultimately, and be ready for that all the time.
Yeah.
So manners are good.
Is there an instance where you have your neuro persona having a influence, or rather the way that your neuro persona has went as a streamer, informing back to your person as Austin? Like where the persona has changed your person itself?
I was more of an elitist before I started. I came from like the gifted and talented program in school growing up, and then I left for university early. Basically, you think you're hot shit if you take some of the fast pass stuff in life, but then seeing how much I don't actually know, and my actual impact on the scope of the world and how many amazing and brilliant people they are, you get humbled pretty fast. So I think that was one of the aspects. Another one would be StarCraft and pushing 4GM and then streaming beyond that. That keeps me really humble as well. If anyone here struggles with like feeling like you're just the smartest and fastest person of all time, play StarCraft 2 or StarCraft 1. You will get slapped for an extremely long amount of time as you try to figure out the game. It's just really rich and really fast. So StarCraft changed me in that context, and then poker also changed me with understanding probability and what an ocean it is. Probability is definitely an ocean. A lot of people have the memories of the good luck and bad luck instances themselves, and they try to just process them and understand them and ascribe some meaning to them. Because I think we have that desire. We want everything to have a purpose, or everything to have a reason sometimes. And with poker, probability really doesn't give a crap about how your day is going. It can be just a wild ride of, wow, I've had a bunch of really nice hands to play in really good situations, and we're cleaning house. And then other days it's just shit. It's just terrible. And maybe you're playing well. Maybe you started out in a good mood, but you just get put into a bad situation. And with the move that you make, the bad luck thing happens for you, but maybe that move is going to be good most of the time. It's a pretty rough ride. It's probably like surfing in a context as well, of you're dealing with something that is much larger than who you are, that you can't control, and you're trying to ride that. So being a successful poker player is very similar to being a good surfer, in that you're trying to respect the wave for where it is right now and how you need to navigate that. A lot of people have ego on the line with their poker play of like, I am good, I'm skilled, I'm going to be the next big thing, and I'm going to beat you in this poker hand right now. That's a really powerful energy, and ambition is like a fuel, and it can be really good, but it can also blind you from just reflecting, okay, well, maybe this situation I'm meant to fold. I'm meant to get out of this hand because it's going to go bad for me more than it goes good for me. Or maybe I just don't have enough information to really invest in this hand, so I'm going to get out to avoid a mistake. Like things like that, being able to balance your competitive side and respect the wave of probability and say, nope, we just need to get out as fast as possible from this hand. So yeah, poker and StarCraft humbled me. And then where did the be nice to people stuff come from? I think a lot of it came from football coaches growing up, of respecting your opponent. And StarCraft gave me a place to meet opponents. So thanks, opponents, for all the practice and also the conversation ammo. I've recently been thanking some people who BM me or stream snipe or whatever, in that they increase the dankness level of the content sometimes, because that gives me something to interact with. If I'm the mindset guy and someone does a really bad mindset thing, that's a really easy conversation starter because other people have been in similar situations to that. And that's part of the wave. So that's the wave that I deal with as a streamer. I don't deal with poker hands anymore. I deal with who shows up in the chat, who shows up on the ladder, and that's my variance.
So first off, that was a really beautiful analogy with surfing, but I guess I'm biased.
Well, I was trying to do that, but yeah. EcceFatum is our resident philosopher.
I think it's an interesting notion that kind of also relates to identity, where you're this instance of yourself in each moment, and then you have reality throwing you around and shaping you in a sense as well, where you can have a good sense of what's happening and what will happen in the future, and you'll never know. You don't have this certainty. So you will change over time, both in a sense that you want to go, but also in a sense where it's just reality throwing you into some things you would not have expected, you might not have wanted. And this will shape you as a person as well. One interesting thing I find when it comes to identity is how we're having these different personas based on our current activity. Like you're not the same person you are with your friends than you are with your family than you are at work, for example. We're always, like, I think the essence of ourselves is the same, where if we're polite in one place, we're most certainly polite in the others as well. And like there's this shared identity to it, but we're showing different aspects of it based on our social context.
One analogy that comes to mind is how fast you're driving. In certain situations, you're applying heavy restraints to your behavior. That would be like trying to drive really slowly through an area as to not rustle anybody. But some people will get in a conversation, you know that you can't do a lot of what you would normally do with your friend group there, so you have to hold back a lot. Other groups, that's your core friend group, people know you inside and out, like there's not anything that you have to filter and you can just be fully yourself. That's a different arena. And you behave differently in those locations. Is it the same you? They different modes, different gears? This is my polite mode.
Ah, yeah, another really beautiful analogy. There's this cognitive dissonance that arises when you have to drive in the lowest gear. You have to be someone, not you're not, but you have to restrict yourself really heavily. In my experience, this usually happens in a work context where you have to be this good worker, this overly polite guy, even though things are pissing you off. So you tend to be someone you're not, especially in a work context. But there's other examples for this as well. And there's this cognitive dissonance that arises where you become unhappy with who you are because you're not true to yourself. And this is something that a lot of people tend to escape from by getting drunk because they're more able to express who they are in this state of being tipsy or being outright drunk because they don't have the same restrictions on themselves. So basically, the foot is on the gas pedal in your analogy, and you don't have to worry about who you're running over.
Yep, that would
And
be the fuck it, just go full degen, do whatever you want.
exactly. And this is normal to some degree. I think we have to limit ourselves due to the social circumstances. But I think it's important to be as close as you can be to who you really are, no matter the social circumstances. So not try to hide who you are and just have a good feeling about how you interacted with people, even though you might have done differently in a private capacity than you did in official capacity.
Mm. It's a very tricky game. You mentioned identity as being a kind of yikes topic.
I think we didn't get into all the identifiers that could have been really yikes to talk about because they tend to rally up people. Things like sexual or racial identity, which we don't have to get into, but I think it's not helpful to get into. But I think the subject of identity, as we've been talking until now, it's been not as controversial as it could be.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of it is describing the labels attached to people, and that's one of the shortcuts that you take when you're trying to generally understand a complex system is you take shortcuts and say, okay, this is this group or that group, and this is how this group or that group tend to behave or look or whatever. And you make a bunch of assumptions, and one thing that's really important to have in your just mental toolkit moment to moment is that at any time an assumption that you have can be proven wrong right away. So you should have an open-mindedness with people and don't really expect them to behave exactly like an archetype that society might describe. Be open to surprises. Reminds me of the line of Gandalf saying that hobbits can always surprise him, even though he's a mighty wizard and hobbits are comparatively simple creatures. They still do cool and unexpected things that he couldn't have anticipated. So giving people the benefit of the doubt, there's a Bill Nye quote, everyone you meet knows something you don't. Just seeing the value in other people. Be excited to learn from them. In Korean Brood War culture, one of the things they say to each other at the start of the match, like GLHF, is teach me a move. Maybe that's from Go or something before Brood War. But it's a really good attitude to have with interacting with other people. A lot of times it ends up being the measuring contest assessment. You look at a person, you say, am I better, smarter, faster, etc. than this person, and how does that make me feel? Instead of, this is a human being who has survived orbits around the sun multiple times, and they have an abundance of experience as a result of that. And they've survived so far on a pretty treacherous planet with disasters and disease and all manner of violence. So you owe them some level of respect. And then you can learn from them and share in fellowship with them.
Yeah, that teach me a move is really beautiful, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if it comes from Go. Do you know a bit about Go?
Know what about Go?
Um, so the game is compared to chess a lot. It has a similar amount of strategical depth, where it's in contrast to chess. In chess, you have each piece which has a specific value to it. Like the pawn is valued less than the queen, for example, because the queen can move. It has a lot more utility to it. So in Go, you only have one value of piece, and the goal is not to outstrengthen your opponent as in chess, but it's to have as little moves as necessary in order to occupy as much space as you can. So it's about space, not about the individual pieces. And it's super complex game. I've tried to get into it. I still do. It's really difficult. Like there's a lot of things you can do, but as one of the stated main rules of Go is whenever you don't have a clear path forward, like a piece you need to set in order to restrict the other person from taking a big part of the field, the goal is to make a beautiful move. So if you don't have to do something, just make something beautiful, which is super nice concept.
Like just beautiful by the arrangement of the pieces on the board?
Not beautiful. I think it could be that, but it's more meant of do something unexpected, do something that is changes the game. And if you like it's super interesting for anyone not familiar or only a bit familiar with Go. I'd highly recommend you watch the documentary on the AlphaGo, the algorithm that was finally, I think, like 20 years after a chess computer was able to beat the best human players. And it goes into a bit of how the game is played and also how the computer started to do beautiful moves, like something unexpected, something as the opponent you don't know how to react to it. You see it, it's something that throws you out of whack, and that's a beautiful move in Go.
When you said beautiful move, it made me think of sometimes I'll look at a Terran or Protoss stream and they arrange their production buildings or their supply depots or pylons in a nice aesthetically pleasing pattern. It's not optimal in like the pro gamer sense of where you should put the buildings to make the most defensible, etc. It just looks nice, and that's a pretty fun part of the game too. That made me think maybe Go. It's kind of similar. If you're totally lost and don't know what to do, like make a cool design.
Yeah, try to make a smiley face.
Yeah.
If you manage to do a smiley face, that's super good in Go because then you have like everything that's within that circle would be your territory. So if you can do that, that's not only a beautiful move, but it will most likely win you the game.
Nice.
But it's not beauty in the direct visual aesthetic sense, but it's beauty in terms of it being something unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there could be something to be learned from this in terms of our identity when we don't know what to do based on our different values, based on our ideals of how we should or should not act. Just try to make something beautiful. And as we said with this interchanging of externalized and internalized, like trying to make a beautiful move in life will inform you back on what you could do, and therefore it will bring you further as a person, as an individual, to just try to make beauty out of a situation, and that will inform you and you will bring more beauty upon the world.
Are you saying leave things better than you find them if you can?
It would be nice. Just saying. It gets a bit difficult because we all have different ideas of what is better than the other person. So your better might not be the same better as I perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in going by your moral compass and trying to do the right thing is a good idea in most instances.
Being pleasant to others is a positive sum game. Being negative to them and being selfish is a zero sum game. Maybe you can wrestle something from them, but you're causing some negatives as a result of that, so it's usually about break even. But if we work together, we can build amazing stuff.
Yeah. I think like to make it a bit more clear about whether or not moral compass. If you have equal moral consideration for everyone else, I think the move you tends to do are beautiful. If you make a separation between you and your in-group or you as an individual and others, your move tends to be on the more questionable side of things.
It's good to question our moves, but for your moves to be questionable, that has more of a negative connotation to it. Was this a good move? Being able to notice small early mistakes, I think, is a life skill and gaming skill, both. Noticing how something can start to go in a bad direction for yourself, and going back to the poker analogy, knowing when to fold out of that.
I think one of the rules in poker, like not rules of the game, but rules of the mental state you have, is to not regret the times you folded, but to regret the times you called. So basically making the decision of laying down a hand because you don't have enough information or you simply don't have a good enough hand to play it with enough certainty. You shouldn't regret that, but you should regret the times where you made a bad call or you tried to bluff someone out that had the nuts in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a good rule, unless you're just losing all your money by folding all your blinds, which can happen too.
Also, for your average player, I'm not sure if you knew this as part of it, but calling is generally considered a worse move than folding. If you're thinking of like quality of the move choice, calling is a weak, you're not leveraging weight in a forward direction or pulling it back. You're just kind of letting it sit. So checking is also kind of a weak wait and see move, but calling would be what newer players to poker will tend to do because you have a desire to see the outcome. I want to see what happens if I do this. You also,
in my experience,
you perceive yourself as having some memorable chance at winning when the probability assessment is usually wrong. You should raise.
Yeah.
If you're really feeling strong, you should raise.
In my experience, it depends on the aggression level on the table. So if you have people playing aggressive anyways, so if you have someone that just raises and puts in a lot of money almost every hand, you can be slow play a hand and wait for them to put in a bunch of money before you raise it. But as you said, for the most part, it's a good move to represent the hand that you're having because then you see the how it will unfold more accurately, and you get more inputs based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think we could go a lot deeper into many different aspects of identity and what it is, what it isn't, what is essential to a person and what is just the masks they put on based on the different circumstances they find themselves in. And this is what my wife works, like the context my wife works within in her coaching business, which is to get back to those essences and distinguish whether or not this is something that is essential to you and something that is more just this mask we put on. Like we have an ideal of the world and we make decisions based upon that rather than from what is really inherently us, which is super interesting. And yeah, this is something I wanted to ask you about, if you wanted to have her on a talk like this as well, where she could go a bit more into that. I think that'd be interesting, not only to you, but also to the listeners in chat.
I'm down.
And she gets into more specific aspects than I could in terms of what that means for the individual. Like my approach is more so looking at the whole thing and trying to understand what's going on, and her approach is really to look at what does this mean for the person. So I think that'd be great. And I might, or I probably will sit next to her and give my piece to what's going on as well. So that could be a lot of fun.
What would you title that? The topic that she would tackle?
I think the branch of coaching is called anthropological coaching. So I would have to think about, or probably better ask her what she would call it.
I think in the US we would call it life coaching, but her avenue of it would be more of a scientific one than some of the like mystical ones that they'll brand themselves a life coach, but they're not actually studied in human behavior and decision making and what have you.
Yeah, I think like this is one of the titles you can give yourself where it's not defined what it means. So there's a lot of different branches that could call themselves a life coach, and you never know what you get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll try to set this up with the two of you. To kind of wrap up the subject, before we get into something else the next time, I wanted to kind of give a sense of what does this concept of identity mean in context to what Triforce was talking about. What does it mean to be someone, and what can we take from it if there is no inherent meaning to the world? Because this is where I find it's really useful to get a sense of what you could or could not do.
Yeah, what is your skill set? What are you capable of? Which directions can you go in? And then for the person, they would decide which direction they go in.
Yeah. So in void theory, voidism, I don't know how to call it. And the theory of the void that Triforce talked about, it's like this inherent lack of meaning to anything. It's just all is nothing, and nothing is kind of everything. And in the theory of the void, as he explained it, it's to be okay with the nothingness, the meaninglessness of the universe, which I think is a concept that can be great for some people, but it's not something that many people will be okay with. I would not be okay with this. I want meaning. I want something to grasp onto, even though a part of me realizes this is not something objective, but it's rather something that I picked out. I wanted to talk about philosophy because I'm interested in it. I don't think there's a greater meaning to this per se, but I chose into it. And this is where I think that this void theory is not as useful to many people, where it's in contrast to Nietzsche's brand of nihilism, where he actively teaches you to choose into something, dive headfirst into what you think is the right thing, and then see how it unfolds. So with this back and forth of identity, we become who we represent to the outside, and this vice versa of input and output. I think it's important to actively choose into things, to do something, see how it goes. Choosing into one thing doesn't mean you exclude all the other things. It means that you pick something out, you see how that unfolds, and if it's not to your liking, you're free to choose another thing or yet another thing. But you have this constant ongoing drive to become more, to become different, and through the process you will become more indifferent. And I think that's something that the void theory is missing.
Yeah, any mold. It's interesting that even void theory is its own sort of mold. But we're utilizing frameworks as we navigate through ideas. We're kind of making our own mixture. And that makes identity and philosophy really interesting, because everyone's perception is unique and the information that they have as their framework is also unique. Good luck figuring stuff out. You mentioned Hegel, I think, is a person we were going to tackle, an American and French Revolution.
Yeah, so Hegel is basically the next philosopher on the list, but we kind of need to get through the social developments that kind of brought upon Hegel's philosophy first. So I'll have to reach out to Agent Smith if he has the time to go over the American Revolution, and I'm not sure how knowledgeable he is about the French Revolution, arguably a lot more than I am. And to talk about a bit about these social changes, because they're not as necessarily as impactful as the Enlightenment, but they're on kind of the same scope of things, where it's like it's this big social change, and it will inform a lot of decisions and theories that came after. And it's based on the Enlightenment, so they're somewhat intertwined, but it's like a very specific time and notion in history that really informed what came afterwards. So we kind of need to talk about this in order to understand Hegel's philosophy and where he was coming from.
Awesome. Well, this could be a decent wrapping point for the identity discussion, and then we could look at some video.
Yeah, exactly. There's 4 videos I linked. It's like the first one is about Batman, so do with that as you please. It's identity in the abstract, and it's personal identity, it's problems with personal identity, and the 4th one is personhood, which also relates to identity. All of these are Crash Course Philosophy videos, which we've been watching a lot of. They're really cool. They break down the problems in a digestible way, that they really bring up most of the problems and leave it open to discussion afterwards. So depending on how whether or not Agent Smith and myself have time to do the revolutions, we can kind of take these videos for identity part 2 and talk a bit more about some of the distinctive problems, since we're, for the most part, have only covered the surface level on the issues so far.
Well, awesome. I will include the links to these videos in the YouTube description. So if you're watching it from the YouTube, look in the description and you can see the videos that we watch after this. Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Philos-o-clock with EcceFatum.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.